They said I wasn't on the list. Not in a whisper, not in a corner, not as an afterthought. They said it at the entrance, clipboard in hand, lips pursed, eyes flicking over the names like mine had never existed. No Captain and Go listed here. Captain, as if the title I wore on my chest, 3 polished bars glinting beneath desert camouflage, meant less than a family name said with a smirk. As if the 12 years of service I carved into the earth with my body and brain were just dust when my parents were hosting their Bali vacation livestream 2 hours before the hospital called me. I'd taken the earliest flight from Guam, 41 hours door to door. I hadn't even changed. My uniform still smelled like oil, gunpowder, and that strange, synthetic sterility of a base far too clean for what it hides. The hospital gates felt colder than the Pacific air outside, and the woman at reception, her hand hovering above the visitor list, looked confused when I showed my ID. "Are you sure you're family?" That one never gets old. I answered by pulling out a photograph. Grandpa, holding my shoulder, pointing at the stars on my collar. "She's the one who got out." He used to say, half proud, half sad. He called me his good luck talisman. He said I walked like a secret, always watching before I moved. And now he was dying. And my parents were on a beach. I didn't cry. I've seen children in makeshift camps kiss grenades before they explode. I've had to tell a mother her son didn't make it and then watch her return to her kitchen like nothing cracked. Tears are expensive. In intel, you learn to save them for places no one can see. But when she said my name wasn't listed, something inside me tilted. Not broke, not shattered, just shifted, like a compass losing north. I leaned against the wall of the hospital corridor, the linoleum sticky with too many stories. I watched my uncle pass me by, not recognizing me in uniform. My cousin waved to someone behind me, ignoring my raised hand, and my aunt whispered, "I thought she wasn't coming. Didn't she say no to the family chat?" I hadn't. I wasn't even in it. Have you ever felt that? Like you've been wiped clean from your own bloodline, not exiled, not fought, just deleted. I walked past the receptionist and found his room myself. Room 417. Grandpa looked smaller. The man who once carried 2 sacks of rice on each shoulder now lay tangled in wires, and the slow beep of a heart that was too tired to keep pretending. I stood at the foot of the bed. My boots didn't match the room. I should have taken them off. But I didn't, because I wanted the sound of them to mean something. His eyes fluttered open. I braced. He smiled. "Tsui," I exhaled. He remembered. His fingers trembled as he reached for mine. I took off my glove, the black tactical kind, and held his hand with bare skin. "Came home early," I whispered. He blinked. "They told me you wouldn't come." They were wrong. He chuckled a wheeze. "Really?" But in it was the same mischief he had when he used to sneak me mangoes after dinner and say, "Don't tell your mother. You look like your father now," he rasped. "Then I'm sorry." He laughed again. Then he closed his eyes, and I sat there listening to the breath slow, the machine's hum, the outside world spinning without grace. No one came in. No one checked. I had 10 full minutes alone with him. 10 minutes more than they deserved. I thought about how many times they'd spoken of legacy, the family name, the Nguyen bloodline, the heritage they claimed every time someone got into med school or married rich. I thought about the emails they sent about investments, vacations, weddings, and baby showers, all CC'd to each other. Never to me. They never said black sheep. They didn't need to. They said things like, "She's doing her own thing." She always was a little intense. We don't know what she does exactly. What I did was survive rooms no one else could enter. What I did was protect borders they don't believe exist. What I did was come home before they did. His breath stuttered once and then steadied. He wasn't gone. Not yet. But I could feel the curtain falling. That's when the door opened. My mother, in heels too tall for a hospital floor, froze. Behind her, my father carried his camera bag. They looked like tourists who got the location wrong. They saw me, and nothing. Not a greeting, not a question, not even surprise. Just that brittle pause people give when they've written you out of the play and you appear in Act 3 anyway. I stood up. My boots echoed. I saluted not to them, but to the man in the bed. My father looked at my sleeve. "The uniform," he said, as if it were a Halloween costume. "You were in Bali," I replied. He didn't answer. I watched my mother brush past me, pull her phone from her handbag, and open the window shades for better light. "Shouldn't you change?" she asked. "I didn't come for photos." She looked at me, really looked, and her face contorted like she couldn't quite figure out what part of me was still her daughter. "You could have told us you were coming," she said. "I did. No one saw it." I nodded. "That was the point. Have you ever spoken the truth into a void and watched it vanish?" I didn't speak again. I just walked to the window. The city hadn't changed. The buildings still leaned like tired men. The traffic still screamed like wounded animals. And I stood in a room full of blood relatives, feeling like the foreigner. Grandpa stirred. My mother rushed to him, brushing his hair, whispering something about how everyone was here now. I wasn't included in that everyone, but he opened his eyes, looked at me, and mouthed one word: "Salute." I did, in silence, and he smiled. They didn't understand, but he did. My brother arrived 2 hours later, wearing a bomber jacket like he'd just stepped off a Netflix set, aviators still tucked into the collar, his voice louder than necessary, as if the hospital were a bar and we were there for drinks. "Traffic was insane," he said, kissing Mom on the cheek. "Couldn't get a grab from the airport." I stood near the sink, rolling my sleeves quietly, watching the IV drip count time better than any clock. He saw me, smirked. "No way," he said. "They let you in." I didn't answer. He chuckled and walked over, giving me a one-armed hug like we were war buddies. His cologne clung to my uniform. I wanted to shake it off. "You still doing that intelligence stuff?" he asked. Like it was a hobby. Like he didn't remember the night I called from Jordan. Voice shaking because 3 of my team had just vanished into the dust. "She's still pretending to be a robot," Mom said, laughing gently. "Always serious. Never calls. Probably can't. Right. Everything top secret." The words were jokes, but the intent wasn't. That's the thing with family, they know how to dress cruelty in silk. My brother took out his phone, started scrolling. "Wait, let's get a picture. All of us." Grandpa would want that. Would he? He barely opened his eyes now. His lips moved with invisible words. The machines softened their beeps like lullabies for the dying. "Not now," I said. But they were already arranging themselves around the bed, fixing hair, straightening collars, holding his hand like they hadn't been gone for weeks. "You're not in this one, Tui," my mother said gently. "You're in uniform. It'll look strange." "It'll look strange." I turn to you now, not them. You, sitting wherever you are, watching this, maybe wondering if I'm exaggerating, maybe thinking families aren't this cruel. But you know they are. You've seen it, haven't you? You've felt that slow drip of being made other, not in rage, but in smiles. Not in exile, but in omission. Have you ever been erased by people who still use your name to impress their friends? I stepped out into the corridor, letting the door click behind me like a final judgment. My boots echoed again louder this time as I passed the nurse's station. "He's lucky," one of the nurses whispered, "to have them all here." All. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. I went down the stairs instead of taking the lift. I needed the silence, the rhythm. Each step counted like a metronome resetting me. When I reached the courtyard, I found a rusted bench, sat, watched the pigeons peck at crumbs someone had left behind. I thought about the base, about the way we salute our dead, about how even in the blackest ops, when there's nothing left of a man but ashes and silence, someone still folds the flag, someone still remembers. But here, remembrance was curated, filmed, filtered. My family didn't mourn, they documented. That's when my phone buzzed. An encrypted message, priority read. I opened it with muscle memory. Coordinates, a timestamp. One line contact in Hanoi confirmed. You are the point. Extraction window 18 hours. I stared at the screen. There it was again, the split. The daughter who wasn't listed, and the officer who couldn't be ignored. You ever feel like you live in two bodies? One that bleeds in silence, and one that commands shadows. I looked back toward the hospital windows. Somewhere up there. My mother was probably still arranging the photo, my brother probably making jokes, my father polishing his old grievances like trophies. But in 18 hours, I'd be on a plane again. In 72, I'd be buried in a black site briefing room, orchestrating movements that could change borders. And none of them would know, nor would they ask, because knowing me required effort, and effort was not a family trait. When I walked back in, the priest was already there, soft-spoken, kind, the kind who held pain like it was sacred. He looked at me, nodded at the uniform. You his. I am. He smiled. He spoke of you. You know. Said you were his spine. My throat caught. Spine. The thing that holds up everything quietly, invisibly. They let me stay in the room for the final prayer, but not close. I stood back, watched as the others cried with dry eyes, touched his hands like it meant something now, said their apologies in whispers too late. When the time came, I leaned forward, whispered in his ear, "Rest easy, Grandpa. The perimeter is clear." The priest blinked at that, but he didn't ask. He didn't need to. He felt it the way soldiers say goodbye, and Grandpa exhaled, once, and never again. No sound, no alarm, just peace. And somewhere in that silence, I felt something unclench inside me. I looked at my parents, my brother, the relatives waiting to be seen, and I knew then I was done begging to be invited. I walked out before they could stop me. Down the corridor, out the gate, into the night that belonged to me again. The air outside had cooled, not from weather but from clarity. When I stepped past the hospital gates, I didn't look back. Not once. I didn't owe them that. Instead, I walked to the alley where I'd parked the car I'd rented with my own credentials. Military-grade clearance wasn't meant for things like this, but it had its uses. I needed the privacy. I needed to drive, not be driven. The engine purred like a secret waiting to be told. I didn't play music, didn't open the window, just gripped the steering wheel and watched the neon signs flicker past hair salons, karaoke bars, billboards selling skin-lightening cream and false promises. The world had no idea that inside that car sat the woman who decrypted the Hanoi intercepts 3 years ago, who unmasked the mole embedded in the Pacific pipeline, who signed clearance on operations that even presidents don't hear about until they're already history. And her family, they thought she just didn't want kids, didn't want marriage, was being difficult. You know what that word means when they use it for women like me. Difficult, too focused, too cold, too male. They say it with that tone like you've committed a betrayal just by being excellent without their approval. I parked by the river. Hanoi's skyline loomed in the distance, like it was holding its breath. There. I waited for the signal. The message would come through a specific public Wi-Fi node, an old trick, secure in its simplicity. While I waited, I took out the locket my grandfather had given me the day I left for basic. Inside was not a picture. Inside was a pressed clove leaf, dried, golden, almost translucent. It keeps you invisible, he told me, but not forgotten. I held it now like armor. Do you understand that kind of grief? Not the grief of death, but the grief of erasure while still alive. When you're not lost to someone, you're invisible. By choice. Theirs. The signal came. Brief. Flashing. Coordinates confirmed. In the next hour, I'd be speaking to someone who didn't legally exist. I'd be briefing a man who commanded weapons that didn't have serial numbers. But first I needed to go home. Not to them. Not to that house where family names were currency and I was bankrupt. No, I needed to go to the flat I kept near the old quarter. The one where the walls were blank, the silence perfect, and the neighbors didn't ask questions. Because if there's one thing I learned from both war zones and living rooms, silence holds more violence than noise. I parked in the narrow alley, slipped in through the back entrance, and keyed in my entry code. 4 digits. Not his birthday, not mine. Grandpa's room. The last place he remembered me. Inside, the apartment was cold. I didn't turn on the lights. I dropped my bag, stripped the uniform piece by piece. Not in shame, not in surrender, but in ritual. Each fold of fabric, each strap and pin, it was a prayer. Not to God, to dignity, to memory, to myself. I showered, not to be clean, but to wash away them, their eyes, their jokes, their rewrites of me. When I looked in the mirror, steam curling around my face, I said nothing, but my eyes said everything. They said, "You came back. You stood alone. You didn't break." I dressed in civilian black, tied my hair tight, covered my scars. The military teaches you how to disappear, but I had to teach myself how to arrive. Do you know how exhausting it is to constantly earn your place from people who share your blood? To show proof of self-worth at every door marked family? To be more loyal to your nation than your name? My phone buzzed. New message. Site ready. 1 hour. Eyes only. I locked the phone, slid it under the second floorboard, left the apartment. I didn't need maps. I didn't need directions. I walked through the old streets like I had in my youth, back when I thought medals would matter to them. Back when I believed if I became enough, they'd love me back. Foolish girl. But the woman walking now, she didn't need love. She had purpose, and silence, and power. The rendezvous point was an underground garage beneath an abandoned telecom building. Civilian eyes passed it every day without looking twice. To them, it was just another relic of a failed startup era. But the cameras still worked, the sensors still blinked, and the air inside tasted like secrets that had never seen daylight. He was already there. Black suit, no insignia. The kind of man who had no birthday in any database. He didn't offer a greeting, just a nod. Then he opened the steel case and slid the files toward me. "No one else reads this. You've got 12 hours. Final extraction in Lang Sun. Our target knows your face." I scanned the first line. My stomach knotted, not from fear, but from recognition. The operation would take me to a border village where I'd once stood in civilian clothes, pretending to be someone's lost niece. That girl no longer existed. Only the ghost remained, and I knew how to use ghosts now. When the debrief ended, he asked, "You still in touch with the family?" I didn't answer. He didn't ask again. We both knew those with no record still had rules. As I left, I took the folder with me, but I carried something heavier, an awareness that my greatest asset wasn't my clearance level or my weapons training. It was the fact that no one had ever really seen me, not even the people who raised me. Do you know what that gives you? Freedom. Not the happy kind. The cold, sharp kind. The kind that lets you walk through fire while others argue about its temperature. I walked back to the car. The city had fallen into that strange quiet that only arrives after 3 a.m., the kind where street lamps flicker not because they're broken, but because they're tired, like everything else. At a red light, I thought about the memorial they were planning for Grandpa. My cousin had messaged me finally, said there'd be a small ceremony at the family pagoda, said they hoped I could attend, if you're not too busy saving the world. A smile tugged at my mouth. I didn't reply. They weren't ready for what my silence meant now. You ever walk into a room knowing you owe no one a single word? That's what I wanted. Not revenge, not reconciliation, just silence. Owned, controlled, weaponized. I took a left onto the bridge that arched across the river. Below, the water moved like a body trying to forget it had ever been still. The case beside me thudded softly as the car swerved to avoid a pothole. It wasn't heavy, but what it held could unmake people. Reputation, memory, allegiances. Sometimes I wonder if they'd respect me more if I told them what I do, if I laid out every classified action, every mission, every close call. But then I remember people don't respect what they can't understand. They fear it, or they mock it, or worse, they rewrite it until it's small enough to dismiss. I passed the pagoda on my right. Candles were being set up for morning prayers. My family would be there in 5 hours, dressed in white, eyes puffy from a grief they performed better than they felt. And I'd be gone. Not missing, not hiding, just gone. By choice. Because sometimes, coming home isn't about being welcome back. It's about standing on the threshold and realizing you've outgrown the walls. I didn't slow down. The city dissolved behind me, and I, once again, became the shadow they forgot to fear. Lang Sun by dawn is a different world. Mist clings to the hills like breath held too long. The roads are narrow, teeth-chattering gravel paths that weave through rice fields and memories. Out here, the noise of the capital fades. There's only dirt, stone, and the sound of things unspoken. I arrived in silence. No entourage, no convoy, just me. A burner phone, and a locked case they didn't even ask me to open yet. The contact would come to me when the village elder gave the signal. That's how these things work, half tradition, half espionage, and no room for mistakes. I sat beneath the old banyan tree outside the schoolyard. Children played, oblivious. A girl ran past barefoot, her laugh splitting the morning haze. I remembered being her once, just for a blink. Then I was back in my boots, eyes scanning every rooftop, every window frame, calm on the outside, razor wire on the inside. The elder arrived around 7 a.m., bent back, eyes like stone. He didn't speak, just handed me a tin of green tea and nodded. That was the signal, and I followed. Inside his house, the contact waited. Young, too young for the fire behind his eyes. He spoke in code, no names, just places and silences. I listened. I recorded nothing. But I remembered everything. I always do. He left through the kitchen wall, a panel that slid open without a sound. Just like that. He was gone. Like smoke. I stood alone again, holding information that could end the careers of 6 men. Men whose decisions once put operatives like me into the field with defective comms and false intel. Men who still held wine glasses in Saigon while speaking of patriotism like it was currency. Do you know what it feels like to hold truth that could burn down legacies? It doesn't feel powerful. It feels heavy. Not a flame, a stone, cold, immovable, yours to carry, yours alone. I left Lang Sun before noon. Didn't wait for thanks. Didn't need a witness. That's the job. That's the life. You act. You vanish. You don't explain. But something lingered in me that day. A question. Maybe. A doubt. Not about the mission. About home. About whether the version of me they once knew was ever real. Or just convenient. Because they liked the girl who bowed her head. Who followed rules. Who asked for seconds and didn't speak until spoken to. They didn't like the woman who speaks last because her words weigh more than theirs ever could. Back in Hanoi, the memorial was already in progress. I could see the live stream on my cousin's social feed. Grandpa's urn framed by orchids and old photos. My parents sat in the front row. My brother gave a speech. He said, "Grandpa taught us honor. He taught us to serve." I almost laughed. Because when Grandpa asked me to serve, he didn't mean at his table, he meant in the fire. And I went. There was a pause in the stream, a rustle, then my name. Not from my brother, from the officiant. He said, his granddaughter, Captain Ngo Tui, could not be present today, but her service stands witness. I froze. Not because they remembered me, because for once, they couldn't deny me. That's when the camera caught at my mother's face, going still. My father, blinking like someone had said a word in a foreign tongue. My brother, trying to cover it with a cough. But the words had already landed. Captain. Chui. And in that moment, every time they'd ignored me felt like wind through a closed window. Loud, but not enough to move anything now. They couldn't erase me, not anymore, because someone outside our bloodline had spoken, and silence, once shattered by truth, never sounds the same again. I turned off the screen, let the dark hold me, let the stillness stretch, and I said, just once, to no one in particular. He saw me. That was enough. I didn't go back for the after-ceremony lunch, the white tents, the trays of bonchung and soy chicken, the plastic chairs scraping tile, the polite lies that pass for conversation. I'd sat through too many of those in uniform, invisible beside relatives who praised my cousin for getting a finance job at a bank, who asked me if I was still traveling, who said things like, "That must be fun," when I mentioned deployments. You learn to stop explaining. You learn to let them misname you, because what they call you can no longer touch what you've become. Instead, I went to the cemetery, the old one, where Grandpa's real gravestone waited, the one he paid for himself when he was still walking without help. A quiet plot, shaded by flame trees, hidden behind the noise of family mausoleums. I stood in front of it for a long time, didn't kneel, didn't cry, just stood and saluted. There was no one else there. No photographers, no speeches, no curated moments for Facebook. Just me and him. And the echo of a man who once said, "You will not be understood, child, but you will be necessary." And I was, you understand what that feels like to be necessary but not loved, respected from a distance, never embraced up close. It carves a different kind of armor, one that doesn't clang when you move. It's silent, woven into your spine. I lit a single stick of incense, let the smoke rise without prayer. My presence was enough. Words cheapen things sometimes, and I was tired of making myself legible to people who refused to read. By evening, I was back at my apartment, the files from Lang Sun locked in my case, ready for transport. My burner phone pinged again. A new task. A new departure. I packed in 20 minutes. Didn't take much. 3 uniforms. Civilian black. My knife. 1 photograph. Not of family. Of my team. My real one. At the airport, I moved through security like a shadow. Clearance bypassed most checks. I didn't even glance at the departure board. I already knew where I was going. The gate wasn't marked with a number, just a symbol. A gold circle carved onto the door unnoticed by civilians, unmistakable to us. I boarded the jet without speaking. Inside, it was dark, quiet, the kind of quiet that comes from discipline, not emptiness. There was only one other passenger, a woman, older, rank I didn't recognize. She didn't ask questions, just nodded. She knew. Like I did. These are the people I belong to, not by blood, by fire. As we ascended, the lights of the city faded beneath us, and I felt it again, that sharp line between the girl who left and the woman flying above it all. They'll tell stories someday, maybe. They'll say, she was difficult. She never came home. She thought she was better than us. But they'll never say I broke, because I didn't. I became something they couldn't name. And when that happens, you don't need a seat at their table. You build your own war room. We landed just before dawn. No customs, no fanfare, just a stretch of runway that didn't exist on any map, and the cold snap of wind that always hits first when you're somewhere you're not supposed to be. I stepped off the plane and into the kind of air that feels pre-cut, like even the molecules had been arranged by command. 2 men met me. Civilian clothes, military eyes. They said nothing. just handed me the badge, a temporary one, red-lined, high clearance. My name misspelled. I didn't correct it. Inside the compound, the lights were surgical, walls windowless, no clocks, the kind of place where time was measured in approvals, not hours. I was taken to a holding room, given tea I didn't drink, and told to wait for directive confirmation. I used the time to review. Everything from Lang Son to the leak in Da Nang. The dots connected faster than I expected, faster than anyone wanted to admit. This wasn't about border intel or smuggling routes. This was internal, high level. Someone in command had made a deal they couldn't walk back, and I was the one sent to clean it without leaving fingerprints. When the door opened, it wasn't a commanding officer who entered. It was a diplomat, civilian suit, diplomatic pouch, soft hands. "I'm here as a courtesy," he said. I said nothing. "You're to neutralize the asset. No arrests, no statements, no loose ends." I nodded. "And Ngo Tui?" He paused. "No headlines." I met his eyes. Cold. Flat. "I'm not the headline type." He smiled like he didn't quite believe me. "But you do, don't you? You, who followed me this far. You know I don't care for lights or noise. I care for precision, for outcomes, for silence that means something." He slid a folder across the table. Black seal, red tab. Inside a name I recognized. A man who once briefed my brother-in-law at a conference, who once complimented my mother's cooking, who'd once said, "You're Ngo's daughter. Didn't expect someone so quiet." Ironic. He wouldn't hear my footsteps now either. Mission parameters were clear. Isolate, interrogate, terminate if required, and if not, vanish. I changed into civilian clothes, tied my hair back, wore glasses with no prescription and a scarf stitched with GPS threads. My look wasn't fashion. It was forgettable. The way real danger always is. I boarded a domestic flight using credentials that technically expired 5 years ago, but no one dared question them. The airport was noisy, busy, families with toddlers, businessmen arguing with stewardesses. A man beside me played Candy Crush while I quietly ended the career of someone who once rerouted aid money into weapons trade. The flight lasted 90 minutes. The mission would take 6. I wouldn't return. Not here. Not ever. Because this place wasn't mine. It was a tool. And tools once used don't belong. At the extraction point, the air was thin. Mountain wind. Sharp and clean. I waited at the edge of the old radio tower. Birds scattered when the chopper came. Black. Unmarked. I didn't flinch. Didn't wave. Just boarded. Inside, no words were exchanged. Just a nod from the pilot. Recognition without intimacy. My favorite kind. As we rose above the clouds, I thought again about my family, about the way they'll tell it later. She's always gone. She never really fit. We don't know what she does. And maybe that's true. Because how do you explain a life of shadows to people who only believe what's posted? How do you tell them that metals don't clink, they whisper? How do you say, "I was never trying to make you proud"? Only safe. You can't, so you stop trying, and you start building something else. A legacy that doesn't require approval, a name that echoes in rooms they'll never enter. A presence so strong, even your absence shakes them. I watched the land flatten below us, watched villages become dots, rivers become threads. And in that quiet altitude, I whispered the truth not to anyone around me, but to the part of me that still remembers the hospital hallway. I didn't need them to see me. And for the first time, I believed it. 2 weeks passed. I was back offshore, not on land, not fully at sea either. The kind of assignment that exists in between on steel platforms no civilian eye ever sees, where radio silence isn't a precaution. It's a law. Out there. The air smells like rust and oil, and every hallway hums with something classified. I led a team of 5. They didn't know my family name, didn't ask. To them, I was just Tui, or ma'am, And that's all I needed to be. We didn't trade stories. We traded precision. Each of us carried wounds we never named. And still, we moved like one. One night, after a successful intercept that stopped a convoy before it crossed the northern edge of Laos, I stood alone on the helipad. The wind whipped hard enough to feel like absolution. That's when the base technician handed me a sealed envelope, unmarked, except for a red ink stroke across the front. Inside a photograph. It was me, at Grandpa's memorial, not in person, no, but on the screen, in uniform, saluting. Someone had paused the video at that exact moment, printed it, and sent it to me. No message, no return address, just the photo. The gesture shook something loose in me. Not fear, not pride, just a stillness I didn't expect. Because someone had seen it, seen me. Not for politics, not for drama, but for what it meant. I kept it. Slid it behind my ID in the pocket no one ever touches. Maybe it came from a cousin, maybe a stranger, maybe someone who saw the stream, heard the officiant's voice, and realized the only one missing from the photo was the one who mattered most. You know that feeling when the world doesn't apologize, but it adjusts. It doesn't say sorry. It just moves out of your way. That's all I ever needed. A shift. Recognition not through words, but through absence filled. After that, I slept well. Better than I had in years. Because the mission was done. The intel was secure. And the silence had finally become mine. 3 days later, I was called back to base. Commendation. Level 6 citation. They pinned it on me like it mattered. It didn't. What mattered was who was in the room. Not the generals, not the observers, but the Secretary of Defense. He stepped forward, shook my hand, held it, and said, in front of everyone, "We follow her lead now." You should have seen their faces. Half of them couldn't pronounce my name 2 months ago. Now it was etched in protocol. And my family, they didn't know. They wouldn't understand. But someone told them. Because the next time my brother posted a family group photo, he tagged me. No mention of rank. Just my name. As if it had always been there. It hadn't. But it was now. Do you understand what that feels like? To be remembered. Not out of love, but out of necessity. To be included because your absence became too powerful to ignore. That's not healing. That's not closure. That's recalibration. I let them tag me. Didn't like the post. Didn't comment. Just let it sit. Quietly. Like a weight returned to its rightful place. Later, my mother sent a message. A single line, we saw the broadcast. You looked strong? I stared at it for a long time. Didn't reply. Didn't delete it either. That night, I took off my badge, set it down, stood before the mirror. No uniform, no weapons, no façade. And I saw myself, not the captain, not the daughter, just the woman who stood alone in the hospital corridor and never flinched. The woman who came home early before any of them were ready. The one they forgot to list. The one they could no longer erase. And I whispered, not for them, not for anyone else, but for the girl I used to be. You never needed to be invited. Then I walked out the door. Mission ready. World quiet. Self-contained. And I didn't look back. I didn't need them to respect me. The whole room already did.